Now that we're in June, it's not all about just planning and planting our gardens anymore. It's about tending to our plants in our garden so that everything can thrive. However, if you are a gardener in zone 9 or above and you have not got anything planted yet, you can still do so. You can still pretty much plant whatever you would like, but especially the crops that are short and half season. And if you aren't sure what that means, a short season crop just means that it reaches maturity faster from the time of planting to harvest. And a long season crop takes a while to mature before you can actually harvest. So all of that is actually listed out in my complete Zone 9B vegetable gardening guide, which will be linked in the description. And I have an entire page right here that I have open to go over with you that's all about short, half, and long season crops. So for example, beans are a half season crop. And so those are one of the crops that I plant multiple times throughout the summer. So I usually will plant them by seed as early as I can do so once the weather's warmed up and the soil is warm enough for them to germinate. And then I'll wait about a month and then I plant them again. So that means I have extended harvest. So once those first plants start kind of dying off, then I have newer plants that are already growing and I can just continue my green bean harvest all season long. Another example of a half season crop is cucumbers. Cucumbers can be planted by seed or as transplants. I always recommend planting them by seed. However, the point is that you can plant them throughout the summer. You don't just get one planting. And that's what I love to talk to gardeners about, because I know in the beginning of spring, as the weather's warming up, there's this huge hype of getting your spring garden planted. And once that point once we get beyond that point of the spring excitement, people feel behind and they feel that they can't actually still plant their garden, which is not true at all. I just recently got a whole entire seed collection that's a specific Zone 9 seed collection. I will also link to that in the description. And I was working with a company called True Leaf Market to put together this collection of seeds specifically for Zone 9. And I've been so excited about it, but I didn't really say much because I wasn't sure if it was going to be ready for this year's planting. But they got to it a lot quicker than I thought. And so I finally got the seeds in the mail, and I just planted a ton of things by seed just a couple weeks ago. In fact, I actually still have a few more that I'm going to still plant hopefully this weekend. Time gets away and we get behind, but that is the great thing about gardening in Zone 9. We have plenty of time. So there's not just one planting date, is my point. You can plant pretty much throughout the entire summer, and it's actually very strategic because then you space out your harvest and you don't get just one huge harvest at once. You have staggered plants from different planting dates, so you can have smaller harvests but all season long, however you choose to do it. An example of a long season crop would be winter squash, such as butternut squash or some pumpkins. They take longer to mature, so you can definitely still plant them. They are just going to take longer to reach maturity. So you usually only want to do 1 to 3 plantings of those, but early on in the season, from our first planting dates in spring, once the weather's warm enough, to about the end of June, and that will ensure that you can get to your harvest date. But as far as all the half and short season crops, you can just continue planting all summer long. And if you were on top of it and you planted everything right as soon as you could, you should still plant things now so that you can have some staggered harvests throughout the summer. So again, everything that you need to know about planting in Zone 9 is in this gardening guide, and it will be linked in the description. And so now I just want to talk about some tips and things that you could be doing in your garden right now during the month of June. I'm just going to kind of go over what I'm doing on a daily basis to give you some ideas of things that you could be working on in your garden right now as well. So one of the things right now is that I have everything set up on irrigation, which is great. I definitely recommend that that's something that every gardener set up. But we've actually been having pretty cool weather for June, which is a blessing. I love the cooler weather. Usually by now it's into the hundreds and we're miserable. So the cool weather is nice, but that means that my timer and my watering right now is a little bit different than it usually is. And so I have everything set up and it's getting watered by the irrigation system, but I'm just manually doing it right now because there's been days that I've been able to skip watering and I'm not even actually having to water every day. So that's been pretty nice, but it just means that I'm going out to the garden each morning, I'm checking on how the plants look, I feel the soil to see if it still feels moist, and I may skip watering for a day, or I may just manually set it to water once a day. And then there's a few things that I've actually just been watering by hand because I recently planted a few seeds and they were just little seedlings, and so I didn't want to set them on irrigation and have them get overwatered or underwatered, so I was just hand watering. So that's something. Another thing is if you do have irrigation lines set up, as the black line warms up in the sun, it does move. So definitely walk through your plants and make sure that each mister, however you have yours set up, for example, in my garden, I have, in my long rows, I have the long black line and I have little bubblers at each plant. And I was just walking through this morning, and because that line has warmed up, the sun kind of makes it move and shift. And so the bubblers weren't actually on the plant. So I had to move that line and get the bubblers back at each plant. And then I'm going to go through now that the line's pretty much stretched out and warmed up and kind of limber, and I'm going to stake it down so that it hopefully doesn't keep moving. But definitely check on that in your garden if you haven't peeked at things in a few days. Another quick tip is to just do a regular walkthrough of your garden and just take care of a few little housekeeping things. For example, if you see a few weeds that need to be pulled, just spend a couple minutes each day pulling some weeds. Be sure to check on your plants and see if you notice any pest issues. The sooner you can treat the pests, the better, or try to prevent them altogether. So I went through in my garden and I planted marigolds at each plant, and the marigolds help deter pests, and then they also attract beneficial insects, so it's a double win. And so marigolds are just a really cheap flower. They're very common. You can pretty much find them at any garden center, or you can plant them by seed yourself. And I just plant one marigold by every plant, and that has really helped with my pest issues. I've been doing it for the last few years consistently, and I've had much fewer pests than in years past. Another great thing that is the most exciting part about this time of year is that you're probably going to start seeing some fresh produce on your plants. And so be sure to harvest your fresh fruits and vegetables. Don't let them go to waste. I know in the beginning sometimes it's a little tough because we don't get huge harvests at once, so you kind of just have maybe like 1 or 2 cherry tomatoes and 1 zucchini or 1 cucumber. There's not that much to do with them in the beginning, and so I just tend to just eat them fresh in the beginning and just cut them up raw, or eat your cherry tomatoes right off the vine, whatever it is that you like to do. And then as the season continues on, you'll get larger harvests and you can actually make things with them. So in the beginning, just have fun and eat them right off the plant if that's what you like to do. I know our son Cooper, he right now loves every veggie in the garden. So a few months back when it was cooler, we had fresh peas and he would just eat the peas right off the vine. Now we have green beans coming off. Not enough to do anything with, but when I go out to the garden, I'll pick a green bean and hand it to him. And he loves them. This morning, I actually just gave him his first cherry tomato right off the vine, and that was another new favorite. Another great tip for this time of year is to start pruning your vegetable plants. A few popular ones to prune are your tomatoes, peppers, basil, your herbs. So when you start noticing that your basil is getting seeds on top, you definitely want to prune the top of that plant, which will encourage new growth, but it will prevent it from going to seed. So prune your basil. Same thing if you notice that with any of your other herbs. If they start going to seed, you want to cut off that growth, which will encourage new growth, but prevent further seeding. Then you can prune up your tomato plants. You can also prune your peppers and squash plants. There are so many little tasks that can be done that will encourage better growth. It will keep things more neat and organized. And so I highly encourage pruning. One of the things that I just spent the last few days doing was pruning all of our tomato plants, and it encourages new growth, which is great. You do only want to prune your indeterminate tomato variety, so that's an important thing to remember. But the cool thing about pruning your tomato plants is that you can keep the suckers and put them in water, and then that will grow roots and you can plant it in your garden later on in the season. So by pruning your own current plants, you then have this whole backup supply of tomato plants that you can plant later on in the season. So if you would also like to prune your tomato plants, be sure to head to this next video because I go over which types of tomatoes can and cannot be pruned, as well as the step-by-step process of how you do so. So head to that video and I will see you there.